The formal documentation provided herein offers an exhaustive and meticulous transcription of a high-stakes confirmation hearing held within the United States Senate chambers. This particular session remains a focal point of national discourse due to the profound ideological divisions it laid bare regarding the future of federal law enforcement. At the heart of this legislative inquiry was the examination of Kash Patel, a figure whose nomination to lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation sparked unprecedented levels of scrutiny. The atmosphere within the room was characterized by a palpable tension, reflecting the gravity of appointing an individual to a position that demands absolute impartiality and adherence to the rule of law. Senator Amy Klobuchar, a seasoned legislator known for her methodical and rigorous questioning style, spearheaded the inquiry into Patel's qualifications and past conduct. Her approach was not merely performative but was rooted in a deep-seated concern for the institutional integrity of the nation's premier domestic intelligence and security service. The dialogue that unfolded was a complex tapestry of constitutional debate, personal accountability, and the clashing interpretations of executive authority. Every word uttered during this session carried the weight of potential policy shifts that could redefine the relationship between the government and its citizens. The proceedings began with a series of foundational questions designed to establish the nominee's understanding of the FBI's mission and its historical independence from political influence. As the clock ticked on, it became increasingly clear that this was not going to be a standard bureaucratic vetting process. Instead, the hearing evolved into a profound interrogation of what it means to serve the public interest in an era of intense political polarization. Senator Klobuchar's inquiries were specifically tailored to address a series of controversial statements and actions associated with Patel throughout his career in the public eye. She sought to reconcile his previous rhetoric with the sober, non-partisan demands of the role he was now seeking to occupy. The nominee, for his part, maintained a composed demeanor, though his responses often skirted the directness that the committee members were searching for. This initial exchange set the stage for a much deeper dive into the specific grievances and endorsements that would define the remainder of the confirmation process. Central to the senator's line of questioning were Patel's previous assertions regarding the fundamental processes that underpin American democracy. Klobuchar pointedly referenced his past claims that presidential elections had been compromised by systemic fraud, a narrative that has caused significant friction within the American body politic. She pressed him to explain how such views could coexist with the FBI's duty to protect the sanctity of the electoral process without bias. Patel's history of public commentary became a primary exhibit in the argument over his fitness for the office, with critics suggesting his views were incompatible with the Bureau standards. The discussion frequently touched upon the delicate balance between free speech and the responsibilities of a high-ranking intelligence official. The inquiry then shifted toward Patel's past rhetoric concerning the prosecution of career civil servants and members of the press. Klobuchar highlighted several instances where the nominee had suggested that those within the government who opposed certain agendas should face legal repercussions. These statements had previously sent shockwaves through the federal workforce, leading to concerns about potential retaliatory actions under his leadership. The senator emphasized that the power to prosecute is one of the most significant tools of the state and must be shielded from personal or political vendettas. Patel's responses to these specific concerns were often nuanced, attempting to reframe his previous comments as being focused on accountability rather than retribution. However, the skepticism from the committee remained high as they weighed the impact of his words on the morale and functionality of the Department of Justice. The conversation also delved into more unconventional aspects of Patel's professional history, including his involvement in the promotion of various health supplements. Senator Klobuchar questioned whether such activities were appropriate for someone seeking to lead an agency that relies heavily on scientific evidence and factual accuracy. She raised points about the potential for conflicts of interest, or the appearance of promoting unverified claims while holding a position of significant public trust. This line of questioning served to paint a broader picture of the nominee's judgment and his priorities outside of the traditional national security sphere. Furthermore, the hearing addressed Patel's past suggestions regarding the structural reorganization of the FBI, specifically his comments about closing the Bureau's iconic headquarters. This proposal was seen by many as a symbolic and literal dismantling of the institution's historical foundation, raising questions about his long-term vision for the agency. Klobuchar sought clarity on whether these ideas represented a serious policy goal or were merely rhetorical flourishes intended for a specific political audience. The nominee argued that his intentions were always aimed at making the agency more efficient and responsive to the needs of the American people. Yet, the friction between his radical proposals and the traditionalist views of the Senate committee created a persistent divide throughout the testimony. Throughout the grueling exchange, a recurring theme emerged regarding the nominee's memory and the availability of specific documentation. Patel frequently informed the committee that he did not have the relevant records in front of him to provide a definitive answer to their more pointed questions. He often suggested that his past statements were being taken out of context or were being misrepresented by his political detractors. This defensive posture led to several moments of frustration for the questioning senators, who felt that the nominee was being intentionally evasive. The struggle over the truth of his past words became a central drama within the hearing, illustrating the difficulty of vetting a candidate in the digital age. Despite the intensity of the questioning and the gravity of the concerns raised, the documentation also reflects a different perspective on Patel's candidacy. Included in the record is a formal letter signed by a group of former FBI agents who expressed their firm support for his nomination. These individuals, many of whom served for decades within the Bureau, argued that the agency is in desperate need of a fundamental cultural and structural overhaul. They portrayed Patel as a bold reformer who possesses the necessary insight and courage to address long-standing internal issues that traditional leadership has ignored. This endorsement provided a significant counterweight to the criticisms leveled by the committee, suggesting that there is a faction within the law enforcement community that welcomes his approach. The supporters characterized the nominee as someone who understands the intricacies of the deep state and is uniquely positioned to ensure the Bureau remains accountable to the people. They argued that his previous experiences in various national security roles gave him a perspective that outsiders or career bureaucrats often lack. This letter added a layer of complexity to the confirmation process, forcing the Senate to consider whether the controversy surrounding Patel was a disqualifier or a necessary trait for a disruptor. As the first segment of this transcript concludes, the tension between the need for institutional stability and the demand for radical change remains the defining conflict of the hearing. The document serves as a vital record of a moment when the future of American law enforcement hung in the balance, caught between two very different visions of justice. The second phase of this exhaustive legislative inquiry delved into the intricacies of bureaucratic accountability and the historical precedent for executive oversight of federal agencies. Senator Klobuchar intensified her focus on the potential implications of a leadership style that many critics characterized as inherently disruptive to the established order of the Department of Justice. The deliberation moved beyond mere rhetoric, examining the concrete policies that might be enacted under a new administrative philosophy. There was a profound concern expressed regarding the preservation of civil liberties in the face of expanded investigative powers directed at internal government critics. This segment of the hearing functioned as a critical examination of the thin line between legitimate oversight and the weaponization of federal law enforcement for political ends. Patel remained steadfast in his assertion that the mission of the FBI must be realigned with the constitutional mandate of serving the national interest without the interference of unelected careerists. He argued that the skepticism directed toward him was not a reflection of his personal lack of qualifications, but rather a defensive reaction from an entrenched establishment. This clash of philosophies provided a rare glimpse into the internal struggles that define modern American governance and the friction between different branches of power. The senator's questions were designed to force a clarification on how the nominee would handle sensitive investigations involving political figures from across the ideological spectrum. She emphasized that the public's trust in the FBI is predicated on the belief that justice is applied equally, regardless of one's political affiliations or status. The conversation then pivoted to the specific mechanisms of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and how those tools had been utilized in recent high-profile investigations. Klobuchar raised concerns about past criticisms Patel had leveled against the FISA process, questioning whether he intended to dismantle or significantly weaken these essential national security protocols. The nominee responded by suggesting that his goal was not to destroy the system, but to ensure it was subject to more rigorous checks and balances to prevent future abuses. He pointed to specific instances in recent history where he believed the process had been manipulated to target political opponents, framing his proposed reforms as a return to foundational principles. This line of reasoning sought to position him as a protector of civil rights rather than a threat to national security infrastructure. As the hearing progressed, the focus shifted to the nominee's involvement with private sector ventures and how those associations might influence his decision-making at the highest levels of government. Senator Klobuchar explored the ethical boundaries of a public servant engaging in the commercialization of health-related products while simultaneously holding a portfolio focused on national security. She argued that the perception of such activities could undermine the perceived integrity of the FBI, an agency that must remain above any suspicion of commercial influence. Patel defended his actions as private endeavors conducted within the bounds of existing ethics regulations, asserting that they had no bearing on his professional capabilities. This exchange highlighted the increasing scrutiny placed on the private lives and financial interests of public officials in a highly transparent and interconnected society. The debate further expanded to include the role of the media and the protection of journalistic sources under a potential Patel-led FBI. Klobuchar cited specific instances where the nominee had expressed a desire to revisit SHIELD laws and other protections that allow journalists to report on government activities without fear of prosecution. She underscored the vital role of a free press in a functioning democracy, suggesting that any attempt to intimidate or prosecute reporters would have a chilling effect on public discourse. Patel countered by stating that while he respects the First Amendment, the unauthorized disclosure of classified information is a serious crime that poses a direct threat to the lives of intelligence officers. This fundamental disagreement over where the line should be drawn between national security and transparency remained one of the most contentious points of the session. The inquiry also touched upon the geographical and cultural divide within the agency, as referenced by Patel's previous comments on relocating its operations away from the nation's capital. Klobuchar questioned the logistical feasibility of such a move, pointing out the immense costs and the potential loss of experienced personnel who might be unwilling to relocate. She framed the proposal as a move that could potentially cripple the agency's effectiveness during a period of transition and heightened global threats. Patel, however, viewed the potential relocation as a necessary step to decouple the Bureau from the perceived political echo chamber of Washington, D.C. He argued that moving the headquarters to the American heartland would bring the agency closer to the people it serves and foster a more diverse and representative workforce. In the context of personnel management, the senator raised pointed questions about Patel's views on the civil service versus political appointees within the FBI's leadership structure. She expressed concern that a radical restructuring could lead to a brain drain of nonpartisan experts who have dedicated their lives to the mission of the agency. The dialogue explored the dangers of creating an environment where loyalty to an individual or an administration is prioritized over loyalty to the Constitution. Patel maintained that his priority was to ensure that the agency is led by individuals who are committed to the president's agenda and the laws of the land. This philosophy of executive control versus institutional independence served as the ideological bedrock of the entire confirmation hearing, reflecting a broader debate within American political thought. The documentation then records a series of questions regarding the nominee's past professional relationships with foreign entities and how those might be perceived by the international intelligence community. Klobuchar inquired about the potential for these connections to complicate the FBI's collaborative efforts with foreign partners in the fight against global terrorism and cyber warfare. She emphasized that the director of the FBI must be a figure who commands respect and trust on the world stage to ensure the continued flow of vital intelligence. Patel asserted that his extensive experience in national security had given him a deep understanding of international dynamics, and that he was well equipped to manage those relationships effectively. He argued that his critics were mischaracterizing standard diplomatic and professional engagements as something more nefarious than they actually were. Throughout this portion of the transcript, the use of legal terminology and references to specific statutes became more frequent as both sides sought to ground their arguments in the law. The senator frequently utilized her background as a prosecutor to pin down the nominee on his interpretation of specific legal precedents regarding executive privilege and congressional oversight. These technical exchanges were crucial for establishing a record that could be used by other senators to determine their final vote on his confirmation. The tension in the room remained high, with supporters and detractors alike paying close attention to every nuance of his testimony. This segment of the hearing demonstrated the complexity of the vetting process for a role that is both an administrative position and a symbol of the nation's commitment to justice. The conclusion of this part of the record notes that while the nominee provided extensive testimony, many of the core concerns regarding his temperament and judgment remained unresolved in the eyes of his opponents. The ideological divide between those who see Patel as a necessary reformer and those who see him as a threat to institutional stability grew even wider. The letter from former agents, which had been introduced earlier, continued to serve as a focal point for those defending the nomination, providing a professional endorsement that countered the political attacks. As the committee prepared to move into the final stages of the hearing, the gravity of the decision ahead was clear to everyone involved. The future direction of the FBI, and by extension the nature of federal law enforcement in America, was the ultimate subject of this historic debate. The third installment of this exhaustive congressional record shifts its focus toward the technical and strategic operational capabilities of the Bureau under a potential shift in executive philosophy. Senator Klobuchar moved her line of questioning into the realm of modern warfare, specifically focusing on how the nominee would prioritize the burgeoning threat of state-sponsored cyber attacks. She emphasized that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is no longer just a domestic police force but the primary shield against digital incursions that threaten the nation's critical infrastructure and economic stability. The dialogue examined whether Patel's unconventional approach to agency management would inadvertently create vulnerabilities that foreign adversaries might exploit during a period of internal restructuring. Klobuchar pointedly asked if the nominee possessed the technical depth required to oversee complex counterintelligence operations that often span multiple jurisdictions and involve highly sensitive digital forensics. Patel responded by framing the issue of cybersecurity not just as a technical challenge, but as a matter of strategic transparency and accountability within the intelligence community. He argued that the current compartmentalization of information often hinders the government's ability to respond to threats in real time, suggesting that a more streamlined hierarchy would actually enhance the nation's defensive posture. The nominee asserted that his vision for the agency included a more aggressive stance against intellectual property theft, particularly from global competitors who use industrial espionage to undermine American innovation. This part of the hearing highlighted a shared concern for national security, yet revealed a deep disagreement over the administrative methods required to achieve it. The senator's skepticism remained centered on whether a leader who had publicly criticized the deep state could maintain the trust of the specialized technicians who perform this critical work. Furthermore, the inquiry delved into the psychological impact of the nominee's previous rhetoric on the rank-and-file employees who constitute the backbone of the federal workforce. Klobuchar presented concerns from various professional associations representing federal investigators, who feared that a purge of career officials was imminent under a Patel directorship. She questioned how a leader could effectively command an organization if a significant portion of the staff felt their careers were being viewed through a lens of political loyalty rather than professional merit. The senator argued that the strength of the FBI lies in its institutional memory and the expertise of its long-term civil servants, which could be irreparably damaged by a radical change in management. This line of questioning touched upon the delicate balance of human resource management within a high-stakes intelligence environment, where morale is directly tied to operational success. Patel sought to address these concerns by clarifying that his criticisms were never directed at the hard-working agents in the field, but rather at the upper echelons of leadership that he believes have become politicized. He claimed that his goal was to unburden the average investigator from bureaucratic red tape and ideological mandates that come from the central headquarters in Washington. He portrayed himself as a champion of the boots on the ground, promising to redirect resources away from administrative overhead and toward active criminal investigations. However, the friction between this populist framing and the senator's focus on institutional stability created a sharp contrast in the room. The discussion explored the concept of organizational culture and whether it is possible to change the direction of a century-old institution without causing a complete systemic collapse. The hearing then transitioned to an analysis of the nominee's views on the use of informants and the ethical boundaries of undercover operations. Senator Klobuchar raised questions about previous statements Patel had made regarding the internal vetting process for confidential human sources, particularly in high-profile political investigations. She sought to understand if the nominee intended to implement new protocols that would give the director's office more direct control over these sensitive assets. This sparked a debate over the potential for political interference in ongoing cases, with Klobuchar warning that the politicization of the informant program could lead to a loss of credibility in the courts. Patel argued that more oversight was necessary to prevent the types of investigative overreach that he claimed had occurred in the past, asserting that transparency is the best antidote to corruption. Another significant portion of the testimony revolved around the FBI's role in monitoring domestic extremism, and how that mission would be defined under the nominee's leadership. Klobuchar pushed for a clear definition of what constitutes a threat, and whether Patel would apply the same level of scrutiny to all extremist groups regardless of their political leanings. The senator emphasized that the rise of domestic terrorism requires a consistent and unbiased application of federal law, expressing concern that the nominee's past comments might suggest a selective approach to enforcement. Patel countered by stating that his commitment to the Constitution means protecting all citizens from violence, while simultaneously ensuring that the government does not infringe upon the First Amendment rights of those with unpopular opinions. This legalistic tug-of-war illustrated the profound difficulty of policing ideology in a free society. As the afternoon session continued, the discussion turned toward the budgetary implications of Patel's proposed reforms, including the potential costs of decentralizing the agency's operations. Klobuchar questioned the financial wisdom of moving thousands of employees and rebuilding secure facilities in new locations, especially during a time of fiscal constraint. She asked for specific data to support the claim that such a move would result in long-term savings or improved efficiency, pointing out the lack of detailed planning in the nominees' public statements. Patel argued that the cost of failure and the loss of public trust were far more expensive than any physical relocation, viewing the investment as a necessary price for a more accountable government. This exchange highlighted the clash between a pragmatic, data-driven approach to governance and a more visionary, transformational philosophy. The committee also explored the nominee's past interactions with the legislative branch and his understanding of the power of the purse. Klobuchar reminded Patel that the FBI is ultimately accountable to Congress, which provides the funding and oversight necessary for its operation. She questioned whether his history of adversarial relationships with certain members of the Senate would hinder his ability to secure the resources the Bureau needs to function. Patel maintained that he respects the role of the legislature but would not hesitate to defend the executive branch's prerogatives if he felt they were being encroached upon. This underscored a potential for future constitutional conflicts between the two branches of government if his nomination were to be confirmed. The atmosphere in the chamber reflected the high stakes of these theoretical power struggles. Toward the end of this segment, the record notes a series of inquiries regarding the nominee's involvement in international legal cooperation and the extradition of foreign criminals. Klobuchar raised concerns about whether Patel's America First approach to national security would alienate international law enforcement partners like Interpol or Five Eyes. She argued that in an interconnected world, the FBI cannot operate in a vacuum and requires the cooperation of allies to track down global threats. Patel responded by asserting that American interests must always come first, but that strong partnerships are built on mutual respect and clear boundaries. He suggested that some existing international agreements might need to be renegotiated to ensure that they are providing a tangible benefit to the American taxpayer. This part of the document concludes with a focus on the broader implications of the reform movement within the federal government. The testimony captured a moment of profound uncertainty, where the traditional norms of Washington were being directly challenged by a new wave of political thought. The supporters of the nomination viewed Patel as a necessary catalyst for change, while his detractors saw him as a harbinger of institutional chaos. The letter from the former agents, which remained a key piece of evidence, was once again cited as proof that the desire for change was not just political, but came from within the law enforcement community itself. The stage was set for the final, most intense phase of the confirmation hearing, where the nominee's character and ultimate vision for the nation would be the final arbiters of his fate. The fourth chapter of this comprehensive legislative record delves into the complex ethical landscape regarding the intersection of personal branding and public service. Senator Klobuchar directed the committee's attention toward the nominee's previous professional activities that fell outside the traditional boundaries of national security work. She specifically interrogated the implications of a high-ranking official engaging in the promotion of various wellness products and health supplements. The senator raised pointed questions about whether such commercial interests could potentially compromise the perceived objectivity of an individual tasked with leading the nation's premier investigative body. She argued that the leader of the Federal Bureau of Investigation must project an image of absolute sobriety and dedication to factual, evidence-based inquiry at all times. The dialogue explored the potential for a conflict of personality, where the nominee's public persona might overshadow the institutional requirements of the office he was seeking. Patel defended these past ventures by asserting that they were legitimate private sector activities conducted during his time as a private citizen. He maintained that his entrepreneurial spirit should not be viewed as a disqualifier, but rather as a testament to his understanding of the American economy and the private sector's role in society. However, the committee remained concerned about the optics of these activities, especially when juxtaposed with the serious nature of federal law enforcement. The discussion touched upon the rigorous ethics guidelines that govern the conduct of executive branch officials and whether the nominee had fully disclosed all relevant financial interests. Klobuchar emphasized that the American public must have complete confidence that the director of the FBI is not motivated by personal gain or outside influence. This exchange served to highlight the increasing difficulty of vetting candidates who have had diverse and sometimes unconventional career paths in the digital era. Furthermore, the hearing addressed the nominees' previous public statements regarding the declassification of sensitive government documents. Klobuchar pushed for a detailed explanation of Patel's philosophy on what information should be made public and under what circumstances. She expressed a deep-seated concern that a selective or politically motivated release of classified data could jeopardize ongoing operations and put the lives of undercover assets at risk. The senator argued that the classification system exists to protect national security, not to provide fodder for political debates or to target perceived enemies within the government. Patel countered by suggesting that the current system is often used to hide government incompetence or illegal activities from the eyes of the public. He advocated for a more transparent approach, asserting that the American people have a right to know the truth about how their government operates, even if that truth is uncomfortable for the establishment. The inquiry then shifted to the nominees' views on the independence of the Department of Justice from the White House. Senator Klobuchar cited historical precedents established after the Watergate era, which were designed to prevent the president from using the FBI as a personal investigative tool. She asked Patel to commit to maintaining a professional distance from the executive branch and to resist any directives that appeared to be politically motivated. The nominee's response was nuanced, acknowledging the importance of institutional independence while also asserting that the FBI director ultimately serves at the pleasure of the president. This debate over the unitary executive theory versus departmental independence provided a profound look at the constitutional tensions that define the American system of checks and balances. The committee sought to determine if Patel would be a loyalist to a specific individual or a guardian of the nation's legal framework. In this context, the discussion turned toward the potential for retributory investigations against political figures, journalists, and civil servants. Klobuchar referenced several instances where Patel had publicly suggested that certain individuals should be held accountable for their roles in past investigations. She asked for a clear definition of what he meant by accountability and whether he intended to use the powers of the FBI to settle old scores. The senator emphasized that the power to open an investigation is a formidable weapon that must be used with extreme caution and only when there is a clear basis in law. Patel maintained that his focus was on equal justice under the law and that no one, regardless of their position, should be immune from investigation if they have violated the law. This segment of the hearing illustrated the fundamental lack of trust between the nominee and his critics regarding the use of executive power. The record then moves to a series of questions regarding the nominee's relationship with the legislative branch's oversight committees. Klobuchar reminded Patel of the historical friction that had occurred during his previous roles in government, where he was often at odds with congressional investigators. She questioned whether he would be a cooperative partner in future oversight efforts, or if he would continue to adopt a confrontational posture. The senator argued that a functional relationship between the FBI and Congress is essential for the health of American democracy. Patel asserted that he respects the role of Congress but would not allow the Bureau to be bullied by partisan inquiries that he deemed to be outside the scope of legitimate oversight. This exchange underscored the potential for a contentious relationship between the Bureau and the Capitol if the nomination were to be confirmed. As the hearing moved into its later hours, the focus turned toward the Bureau's role in addressing transnational organized crime and its impact on American communities. Klobuchar questioned how a major internal reorganization or the relocation of the headquarters would affect the agency's ability to coordinate with state and local law enforcement partners. She raised concerns that a period of internal upheaval could lead to a breakdown in communication and a loss of momentum in critical cases involving drug trafficking and human exploitation. The nominee argued that his proposed reforms would actually empower local field officers by giving them more autonomy and resources. He suggested that the current centralized model is often too slow to respond to the rapidly changing tactics of criminal organizations. This debate highlighted the tension between a top-down versus a bottom-up approach to federal law enforcement strategy. The committee also explored the nominee's understanding of the legal frameworks governing electronic surveillance and the privacy rights of American citizens. Klobuchar asked for Patel's views on the balance between national security requirements and the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. She sought clarification on his past criticisms of the metadata collection programs and whether he intended to scale back or expand these controversial tools. Patel responded by framing the issue as a matter of technological transparency, suggesting that the government must be more honest with the public about its surveillance capabilities. He argued that the best way to protect privacy is to have clear, enforceable rules that are subject to rigorous judicial oversight. This portion of the testimony demonstrated the complexity of applying 18th century constitutional principles to 21st century technology. Toward the end of this segment, the documentation records a discussion about the morale of the FBI's legal and professional staff. Klobuchar presented evidence of a growing sense of unease within the Bureau's Office of General Counsel regarding the nominee's past comments about the legalities of certain investigative techniques. She asked how he intended to earn the respect of the agency's top legal minds if he frequently disregarded their advice or questioned their motives. Patel asserted that he has a deep respect for the law and the professionals who uphold it, but that he believes in a more active interpretation of executive authority. This philosophical disagreement over the role of legal counsel within an intelligence agency remained a significant point of contention throughout the session. This segment of the transcript concludes with a reflection on the broader societal implications of the confirmation process itself. The hearing served as a mirror for the deep divisions within the American public regarding the role of government and the nature of the system. The supporters of the nomination viewed the intense questioning as a witch hunt designed to stop a reformer, while the detractors viewed it as a necessary defense of the nation's institutions. The letter from the former agents continued to be a point of reference, representing a faction of the law enforcement community that felt alienated from the current leadership. As the committee prepared for the final round of questioning, the weight of the decision and its potential impact on the future of the FBI were clearly evident to all participants. The concluding phase of this historic Senate confirmation hearing focused on the overarching legacy of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the candidate's final vision for its survival in a polarized era. Senator Klobuchar centered her closing inquiries on the vital necessity of public confidence, arguing that the director must be a symbol of stability rather than a source of constant friction. She sought a definitive commitment from the nominee that he would prioritize the impartial administration of justice above any personal or political alliances. The senator underscored the idea that the FBI's power is derived entirely from the consent and trust of the American people, which can be easily forfeited. This dialogue served as a final attempt to gauge whether the nominee truly understood the solemnity of the position he was being asked to fill. The atmosphere in the chamber was one of somber reflection as the gravity of the upcoming vote began to settle upon the committee members. Patel used his final opportunity to address the committee by framing his potential tenure as an era of restoration rather than one of destruction. He argued that the skepticism directed toward him was an unavoidable consequence of his desire to challenge a status quo that he believes has failed the citizenry. The nominee maintained that his unconventional background and outspoken nature were exactly what the agency required to purge itself of systemic biases. He asserted that a truly independent FBI is one that is not afraid to investigate its own shortcomings or to challenge the prevailing narratives within the intelligence community. This defense was characterized by a firm belief that the current institution is at a crossroads and requires a leader willing to take substantial political risks. His closing statements aim to shift the narrative from one of controversy to one of courageous reform, a theme that resonated strongly with his supporters. A significant portion of the final record is dedicated to the detailed examination of the letter submitted by a coalition of former FBI special agents. This document, which was read into the record, provided a robust defense of Patel's character and professional acumen from those who had served in the trenches of law enforcement. These former officials argued that the Bureau has become overly bureaucratic and disconnected from the everyday realities of criminal investigation and national security. They claimed that Patel possesses the unique outsider perspective necessary to dismantle the internal hierarchies that they believe have stifled innovation and accountability. The letter suggested that the opposition to his nomination was largely driven by those who fear losing their influence within the established power structure of Washington. This endorsement served as a powerful counter-narrative to the criticisms leveled by members of the Senate, providing a professional seal of approval that was difficult for detractors to ignore. The discussion then turned to the long-term strategic goals of the agency, specifically regarding the recruitment of the next generation of intelligence professionals. Klobuchar raised concerns that the nominee's rhetoric might discourage talented young Americans from pursuing a career in federal service if they perceive the environment as being overly political. She asked how Patel would ensure that the FBI remains an attractive destination for the nation's top legal, technical, and investigative minds regardless of their political leanings. The senator argued that the strength of the agency is its people, and any leadership style that alienates the workforce is inherently self-defeating. Patel responded by stating that he would foster a culture of meritocracy and mission, where performance and results are the only metrics that matter for advancement. He envisioned a bureau that is more inclusive of diverse viewpoints and less concerned with the groupthink that he claims characterizes the current leadership. Furthermore, the hearing addressed the international implications of a major leadership shift within the premier domestic security agency of the United States. Klobuchar questioned how Patel would handle the delicate task of maintaining information sharing agreements with foreign intelligence services that might be wary of his past statements. She emphasized that global security is a collaborative effort, and that any perceived instability at the top of the FBI could lead to a decrease in cooperation from vital allies. The nominee countered by asserting that strength and clarity of purpose are what international partners respect most, and that a more effective FBI would be a better partner for everyone. He suggested that his direct approach would actually improve communication by cutting through the diplomatic jargon that often obscures the reality of shared threats. This exchange highlighted the global stakes of a domestic appointment, reflecting the interconnected nature of modern security. As the session drew to a close, the senator revisited the issue of the rule of law and the nominee's past threats toward members of the media and the government. She asked for a clear, unambiguous statement that the FBI under his leadership would never be used to suppress dissent or to intimidate those who exercise their constitutional rights. Patel provided a lengthy explanation, stating that his previous comments were directed at those who he believes have abused their power, not at the institutions themselves. He claimed that his goal was to re-establish the guardrails that prevent the government from overreaching in its authority. However, the tension between his past words and his present assurances remained a central point of contention for many on the committee. This final confrontation over the use of state power served as a fitting conclusion to a hearing that was as much about philosophy as it was about personnel. The record concludes with the chairperson of the committee outlining the next steps in the confirmation process, including the submission of additional written questions and the final vote. The documentation captures the lingering sense of uncertainty that permeated the room, as both sides of the aisle prepared for a contentious decision. The transcript stands as a testament to the rigorous, often painful process of democratic oversight, where the character and history of a public servant are laid bare for all to see. It reflects a moment in American history where the very nature of truth, justice, and institutional integrity was being debated at the highest levels of government. The final pages of the record indicate that while the hearing had ended, the national conversation surrounding Kash Patel and the future of the FBI was only just beginning. Supporters of the nominee left the chamber feeling that he had successfully defended his vision and exposed the biases of his critics, while opponents felt their concerns had been validated by his evasive answers. The letter from the former agents remained a significant point of discussion, serving as a reminder that the desire for change is not limited to political circles but extends into the professional ranks of law enforcement. The document serves as a vital historical artifact, documenting the clash between two very different visions for the future of the United States. It provides a detailed account of how the Senate attempts to balance its duty of advice and consent with the political realities of a deeply divided nation. As the final gavel fell, the path forward for the FBI remained as unclear as it was at the start of the proceedings. Ultimately, this record provides a comprehensive look at the vetting process for one of the most powerful positions in the federal government. It illustrates the complexities of modern governance, where every word and action is subject to intense scrutiny and multiple interpretations. The dialogue between Senator Klobuchar and Kash Patel will likely be studied for years as a prime example of the tensions that arise when a transformational figure seeks to lead a traditional institution. The outcome of this confirmation process would have profound implications not only for the FBI but for the entire structure of the American justice system. The document ends with the formal adjournment of the session, leaving the final decision in the hands of the full Senate. This concludes the formal transcription and analysis of the confirmation hearing regarding the leadership of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.